Hello, hello. Just making sure we're pulling up on Facebook for anyone who's there waiting for us. And just so you know, there will be some lag a little bit too.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. Just give me a second. All right, so are you ready to begin? All right, hi everyone, Miss Catherine here from Aram Public Library, and I am here with Dean Robbins, and I am so excited to invite him to our library, virtually right now, but hopefully sometime we can bring him in and see him in person too. He is a Wisconsin author who writes nonfiction picture books about his heroes. So how cool is that? He's written about Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, two of the people we're going to talk about today, Margaret Hamilton and Alan Bean. There's so many cool, I just can't wait to share these books with you. So without further ado, oh, and I also want to let you guys know, we'll have time for questions at the end. So please feel free to put your comments on right underneath the video and I will read them at the end. All right. So without further ado, here's Dean Robbins.
Thanks, Catherine. And thanks to the library for sponsoring this talk. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's a pleasure to talk to you about my latest picture book for young readers, The Astronaut Who Painted the Moon. I wish we could be together in person, but this isn't a bad way to share a book either, right? So hopefully we'll have some fun together over the next few minutes. Well, let me share my screen with you to start things off. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about how The Astronaut Who Painted the Moon came to be. I can trace it all the way back to when I was 10 years old in the late 1960s. That's when I fell in love with astronauts, the brave people who put on spacesuits and blasted into outer space on those amazing flying machines called spacecraft. Back then, traveling to outer space was new, and astronauts were everybody's heroes. Like lots of other kids at the time, I kept an astronaut scrapbook with all my favorite pictures and stories about outer space. When I was 11, I stayed up later than I ever had before, to the middle of the night, to watch the first astronauts land on the moon on television. I pretended I was Neil Armstrong, the astronaut who took the first step on the moon, except that I did it in my pajamas instead of a spacesuit. What I loved most about watching spacecraft blast into outer space were those wonderful things called countdowns. Now, countdowns happen at the start of a space flight, so the spacecraft can take off at a time that scientists think is exactly right, just the perfect second. Somebody from the space program begins counting from a really high number, and they count backwards. When they get all the way down to 10, you hear a voice come over the speakers, and it goes 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. After 0, the voice says liftoff, and the spacecraft blasts off in a huge burst of smoke and fire. It was so exciting, and I never got tired of hearing it. I liked countdowns so much that I did them myself all day long. Before taking a bite of a sandwich, I'd go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, bite. Before getting into a bath, I'd say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, splash. I still do it sometimes, even as an adult. To me, countdowns make everything more fun. Well, with my love of outer space, you might guess that I'd grow up to be an astronaut myself. Everybody thought I would be, but it turned out that what I really liked to do was sit around reading and dreaming up stories. So instead of becoming an astronaut, I became a writer. I wrote for newspapers, magazines, and radio, and one day I decided it would be really fun to write stories for kids, including stories about astronauts and outer space, which I'd loved so much when I was young. That's when I had the first idea of writing about an amazing astronaut named Alan Bean. Alan was the fourth person to walk on the moon with the Apollo 12 mission in 1969. I had a picture of him in my astronaut scrapbook, of course. The thing about Alan is that he was different from other astronauts. He was the only astronaut who was also an artist. Alan's love of art started when he was a boy, making model airplanes that he hung from the ceiling in his bedroom. When he grew up, he fell in love with flying, so he learned how to be an airplane pilot. And he was so good at this that the United States space program picked him as one of the very first astronauts in the 1960s. But Alan never stopped loving art. Even while he was learning how to fly a super fast spacecraft, he was also learning how to be an artist by taking drawing and painting classes. So that meant that when Alan blasted off for the moon in 1969, he was the first artist to go in outer space. And to this day, he's the only artist who's ever traveled in space. When he got back to Earth, he started making paintings to show the rest of us what it looked like and felt like to walk on another world. Well, since Alan was the only astronaut in history to be an artist, I thought it would be fun to tell the story of the astronaut who painted the moon. I started learning about his special method of making paintings, combining science and art in a new way. Alan would start by setting up little astronaut figures on a model of the moon with a light bulb where the sun would be. That helped him remember how the light and shadows looked when he walked on the moon himself. That was the scientific part of making his paintings. Then for the artistic part, he'd let his imagination run free by adding colors. Not just the whites, blacks, and grays that he actually saw in outer space, but reds, purples, yellows, and other colors that showed how he felt being on the moon. Alan knew that artists don't always paint exactly what they see. Sometimes they change things a little in a way that helps people understand how they feel about what they're seeing. And Alan did that by using beautiful colors that showed how special it felt to him to be walking on the moon. But Alan did even more than that to make his paintings special. He would also stomp on the canvases with his moon boots. He'd pour on actual moon dust that he brought back from space, and he'd scrape the paintings with one of his actual moon tools. For Alan, this was a way to connect every painting he made with the time he spent in outer space. Well, after learning all these things about Alan, I was almost ready to start writing my book, The Astronaut Who Painted the Moon. But I had one thing left to do. I had to work up the courage to get in touch with Alan to see if he would talk to me about his work as an astronaut and an artist. Now, remember that Alan had been one of my biggest heroes since I was a little boy, and I'm kind of a shy person. So I was very nervous about getting in touch with him. What if he was really mean and didn't want to talk to me? Well, guess what? Alan wasn't mean at all, but very, very nice. He said he'd love to help me with my book, and I just about fainted from happiness. So we talked, and he shared stories of his time in outer space, and even read over what I'd written to make sure that everything was right. So here's the nicest thing of all. After Alan read my story, he wrote me a note about how much he liked it. The note said, and I'm going to show it to you here, "Hello, Dean. This is beautifully written, Alan." So you can probably guess what I did with this note, right? Of course, I immediately put it in my astronaut scrapbook. Well, should we see how this book turned out with Sean Rubin's beautiful illustrations? Before I start reading The Astronaut Who Painted the Moon, I wonder if we can do a countdown together from 10 to 0, because you know how much I like countdowns, right? So start with me at 10, and let's count backwards right here from our computers. After 0, we'll shout liftoff, just because it's so fun to do, okay? All right, ready? Here we go. Please join with me from home. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. Okay, here we go. Lights flashed. A rocket rumbled. Alan Bean's dream was about to come true. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket roared off the launch pad. Alan shook in his heavy spacesuit. The other astronauts were shaking too. Richard Gordon flipped switches on the control panel. That's a lovely liftoff, Pete Conrad shouted over the noise. The shaking stopped as the spacecraft gained speed. Alan was in outer space. He had trained for so long as an astronaut and a scientist, and soon he would walk on the moon. Alan gazed out the window, marveling at the shapes and colors in space. The sky turned to black. The Earth was a blue and white ball glowing in the darkness. The moon was many shades of gray. Its mountains and craters seemed bigger the closer he got. Alan loved to think about the way things looked. As a boy, he made model airplanes to hang in his room. Green for the wings, red stripes for the tail, yellow stars along the sides. He dreamed of being a brave pilot himself one day. Alan volunteered for Navy flight training. He learned to take off, soar through the air, and glide in for a smooth landing. The Earth looked breathtaking from the cockpit. The white clouds above, the green fields below, the blue all around. Alan wished he could paint what he saw. He found an art class to teach him about patterns and forms. Alan dabbed his brush on canvas to paint a vase of flowers. His flowers didn't look exactly real, but he didn't want them to. They were brighter and bolder than real ones because he let his imagination take over. The painting showed how stunning the flowers looked through Alan's eyes, how they made him feel. The spacecraft flew 240,000 miles in 4 days. The moon was so close Alan could see valleys and ridges. He and Pete got ready to walk on a new world. Alan strapped on an oxygen pack so he could breathe outside. He stepped through the hatch to the most amazing sight. The moon was barren, but also beautiful in its own way. Gray dust as far as he could see, thousands of black craters, hard white sunlight, and everything perfectly still. Alan puzzled over the strangeness of outer space. He and Pete took dozens of photographs. They set up scientific experiments to measure the moon's soil and gases. Even in his spacesuit, Alan was much lighter than on Earth. He had fun bouncing around on his tiptoes. He could run and run without getting tired. His boots made deep marks where no one had stepped before. Alan was super strong in the moon's gravity. He threw a rock and watched it go up, up, up. Would it ever come down again? The 3 astronauts zoomed back to Earth at 25,000 miles an hour. They splashed into the Pacific Ocean to end their awesome adventure. Alan's friends asked him about his time in space. What was it like up there? He tried to explain the moon's barren beauty, but words weren't enough, and his photographs just showed a grim and gloomy place. There was so much more to the moon than that, so much magic and mystery. How could Alan share his story so others would understand? He pulled out his paints and brushes. Alan knew he was the only artist ever to leave the Earth, the only artist ever to see the moon up close. Maybe a painting could show how it felt to be in outer space. Alan began his work like a scientist. He built a model of the moon's surface and used an electric light as the sun. The model helped him paint the angles and shadows just right. Then Alan let his imagination take over. He added red and purple to the gray dust, blue and green to the black craters, yellow and orange to the white sunlight. The moon didn't look exactly real, but Alan didn't want it to. The painting showed how stunning outer space looked through his eyes, how it made him feel. He hoped others would feel the same thing, the wonder of walking on a new world. Alan liked his moon painting so much, he did another one, and another after that. He mixed even brighter, bolder colors on his palette. Could he add real pieces of outer space to his paintings? Alan tried stamping them with astronaut boots. He scratched them with tools he'd used on the moon. He sprinkled dust from his spacesuit onto the wet paint. The surfaces grew as rough and rugged as the moon itself. A museum displayed Alan's paintings for everyone to see. Other astronauts came to remember their own awesome adventures in space. Boys and girls came too. They marveled at the shapes and colors. They felt the wonder of walking on a new world. Some dreamed of being brave astronauts themselves one day. Others dreamed of being great artists. And some dreamed of being both. So can we all clap at our computers for the wonderful Alan Bean? So earlier I mentioned the person who did the pictures for this book, Sean Rubin. Sean did such a beautiful job with the illustrations, and I wanted to show you a few of my favorite pages. On this page, Sean shows the model airplanes hanging from Alan's bedroom ceiling, turning into one of the real airplanes that he dreams of flying. Even though it's just in his imagination, you can see that the airplane at the bottom of the page is blowing the books off his nightstand as it roars off the page. I love the idea of Alan's dream becoming real right in front of his eyes. So here's another page, and this might be my favorite. Alan is learning how to paint, and he's painting right on the space between us, the reader, and him, the character in the book, as if there was a pane of glass between him and us. You see the glass fill up with his marks as he paints and paints and paints. I think that's just an incredibly cool picture. Finally, there's this wonderful picture of the astronauts taking their first step on the moon. You don't actually see the astronauts here, but you know they're there by their long shadows. The Earth is so far away, hanging there in space. How will the astronauts ever get back to it? Sean's picture makes you realize how beautiful it is to be on the moon and also how dangerous. So can everybody watching there at home clap one time for this great illustrator, Sean Rubin? Well, I wanted to end my talk by quickly showing you another outer space book I wrote about one of my real life heroes. This book is called Margaret and the Moon. The name of the hero in this book is Margaret Hamilton. And about 60 years ago, Margaret was one of the first women to work in the United States space program. The space program was trying to get people to the moon for the first time, but nobody could figure out how to do it. Well, Margaret found a way to send the first astronauts to the moon with the help of an amazing new machine called a computer. Her computer programming was so good and so creative that it saved the spacecraft when it looked like it would crash right before touching down on the moon. So I first learned about Margaret Hamilton when I saw a picture of her on the internet next to a stack of the computer code that she wrote for getting astronauts to the moon for the first time. This was a really interesting picture, and I was intrigued, so I found an address for Margaret, and I wrote her to see if she'd be willing to tell me her story. At that time, almost nobody had ever heard of Margaret Hamilton or her important work for the space program. But since my book, Margaret and the Moon, has come out, I'm happy to say that Margaret has become famous. She got a medal from the President of the United States, and she even became a figure in a Lego set about women's contributions to the space program. How cool is that? So one last time, can everybody at home join me in a round of applause for the amazing Margaret Hamilton? Well, thank you so much for tuning in and sharing some time with me. It's been fun to talk to you about outer space and astronauts and countdowns. If you're interested, you can learn more about me and my books on my website, deanrobbins.net. You can also find my email address there and write me if you have any questions. So,
All right, thank you so much. So we do have some questions coming in. Now remember, if you guys think of questions while Mr. Robbins is answering them, feel free to add them and I'll make sure he gets them, okay? Plus, both the books, actually I think all of the books we talked about, plus a few of your others, are all available at Aram Public Library. So you can come on in, you can check them out and read them. And if for some reason we don't have them, or maybe they're checked out, I can get them from another library. So no worries there. So one of the first questions was, oh, this one's kind of tricky. So Hazel wants to know, do you know how many model airplanes Alan Bean had in his collection? And do you like model planes?
I made model planes when I was little, so I really relate to Alan making them. I forgot to ask him how many he made. I think it was a lot. All he ever did was read about airplanes and think about airplanes and talk about airplanes, and he made tons of model airplanes. So let's just say hundreds.
Very cool. When you were talking to Alan Bean, did he say, did he have a favorite experience on the moon, or was it just like being on the moon in general? Like, was there something that he really stuck out to him? And that's also from Hazel.
I think he loved just how strange it was to be on the moon. He could bounce around because he weighed less. He took a rock and threw it into space and he just watched it go up, up, up forever. So all those strange kinds of experiences really stuck with him, and he tried to communicate that in his art.
Very, very cool. All right, this one's actually a question about Margaret Hamilton. When you talked to her, did she say where she learned to code because it was such a new thing? Like, or was it something she sort of had to come up with all on her own?
Well, she was a genius mathematician, and she went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for graduate school. And computers were so new at the time, and it was this completely new field, and she was so excited by it. So and there were you could really not take any classes in it. So she just had to learn it on her own. She found other people to talk to about it and just figured it out as she went along, which is kind of hard to imagine.
Yeah, that's super duper impressive.
Yeah.
So this one's a question from me. All right, you know how like when you meet your idols or your heroes and you think you're going to be super cool? I know I'm not ever. Were you nervous even after you met them and learned how nice they were?
Oh my gosh, very, very nervous. But luckily, both Margaret Hamilton and Alan Bean were so nice that they put me at ease. Margaret just loved the idea of talking about her work because very few people had asked her about it. She was very little known at the time that I contacted her, and she gave me all sorts of technical details about how she made her computer programs and how she got the spaceship all the way to the moon. And I had to say, so I'm writing this for elementary school kids. Can you explain this in a way that they might understand? And she thought about it for a minute and she said, nope. She just wasn't used to thinking about it that way. So I realized, oh, that's my job. So that was one of the challenges of writing this book, taking all that complicated stuff and making it understandable for young children.
I could definitely see that. So we have a few more questions coming in. Did Margaret ever meet Alan?
I don't know, but you know what? I bet she did because she worked on the Apollo 12 mission. So she must have met him. Okay. The thing was, she was based in Boston. And so she wasn't really down there in Houston with the rest of Mission Control. So it was sort of a separate operation, but I would not be surprised if she met the astronauts that she worked with. There's actually some cool pictures of her sitting in the spacecraft and just testing out all the buttons and levers.
That's so cool. So another question was, How old was Margaret when she worked at the space program? Like when she was doing all this amazing coding?
She was in her 20s and 30s. And she's now in her mid 80s and she's still running her own computer software business.
Oh,
She's
wow.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And they both were really excited. You said they were really happy to talk with you about this,
They
right?
were really, you just wouldn't think, you know, people that are so accomplished and so amazing, why would they want to talk to me? But I think both of them like the idea of communicating their story to children. Margaret had great grandchildren, and she was very excited that there would be a book that her great grandchildren could read about her. And Alan, of course, as an artist, was always interested in sharing his story and helping people understand what it felt like to be in outer space. And there'd never been a children's book about him before. So I think he just thought, wow, here's a chance to teach a whole new kind of person what it felt like to be in outer space.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay. So since Alan was one of your heroes, did you ever try and follow in his footsteps in terms of being an artist as well?
Not a visual artist, but if you consider writing and art,
Mhm.
that's what I've done. It was
Very.
so exciting to watch Sean Rubin's illustrations come together because he had to do this strange thing of painting another artist's paintings, which was a strange challenge for him. And we talked about it as he went along, like, how do I create art in the style of somebody else, but that also is mine and expresses my vision? Give him a lot of credit for handling that so beautifully.
Yeah, I mean the illustrations are gorgeous, but yeah, I could imagine, especially if it's someone that you really look up to too. You want to make sure you do them justice, but also make sure it's not like, oh, I copied your your art.
This great artist is going to look at my art. That must be
Yes.
intimidating.
Mm-hmm. So what was something surprising that you learned during your interviews that you hadn't known before? Because I know you were a big fan ahead of time. Was there something that Alan Bean shared with you that you're like, would have never guessed. I had no idea.
Um, I don't think anything surprising. His method of doing his paintings was interesting, and that was kind of a surprise. The fact that he not only painted these canvases, but he took moon dust from his spacesuit and poured them into the paint, and he scraped them with his moon tools, and he stomped on them with his boots. I think he just felt like that would really strongly connect the paintings to his real experience in outer space if they're covered in moon dust and boot prints. I just think that was a very interesting idea that he had.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know. Normally I don't think of stomping on the things that I'm working on, but that's a really great idea. And putting the moon dust in it like really makes it something special and personal. Like nobody else is going to have moon dust paintings.
Yeah. And I was interested in the fact that he combined art and science to create these things. He wanted to get all the angles and shadows just perfect. So he would set those little figurines with the light shining where the sun would be. And that was just, he's an engineer, so that was the scientific part of it for him. But then he just let her rip with paint and colors, and that was the artistic part for him. So just a really unique, just like as an astronaut, he was a scientist and then he was an artist, and he combined those two things in making the paintings. Pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, last call for questions in case anyone has them. I'm going to ask something in between though while we wait to see if anyone else jumps in. Are you working on anything now?
I am always working on new things. I've got a few books coming out this next year. One is about a daredevil race car driver named Kitty O'Neill, who set a speed record, like the fastest that a woman has ever gone on the planet Earth. She set that record in a rocket-powered car,
Wow.
and she was deaf.
Oh, okay.
Pretty amazing. Her name was Kitty O'Neill, and the book is called The Fastest Girl on Earth.
Very.
Got another book coming out about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the wonderful lawyer and judge,
Mhm.
and a book called Mambo Mucho Mambo, which is about a kind of music that was going on in New York City in the 1950s that brought all sorts of different people together on the same dance floor. It was sort of the beginning of the civil rights era, and people who were used to being kept apart because of segregation were all allowed to dance together to the mambo in this one club in New York City called the Palladium. So Mambo Mucho Mambo is about that exciting time.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, it looks like everybody is just quiet and reeling, but I've been hearing gasps and stuff as you were talking about your new book. So can't wait to read those. And I want to thank you so much for joining us, taking time out of your day, and hopefully you're staying safe and cozy where you are.
Thank you. It's been really fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been really, again, thank you again. And hopefully when things calm down, we can have you in person sometime at the library.
I'd love to come to Delavan.
That would be great. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope you guys have a fantastic night. The recording will be up for about a week. So if you missed parts or just want to rewatch or want to share with your friends, please do so. And again, come and check out some of these books at the library. We have these books and more, of course, but come check them out. We have some really great things, and you can get a chance to see those amazing illustrations up close. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Mr. Robbins.
Thanks, Catherine.
Bye, guys.